Welcome to this section on Canada's history, where we will explore the diverse and rich heritage that has shaped our nation. Understanding this history is crucial for appreciating the Canadian identity and the values we uphold today. Aboriginal peoples. When Europeans first explored Canada, they found all regions occupied by native peoples they called Indians, mistakenly believing they had reached the East Indies. These native peoples lived off the land, with some hunting and gathering, while others raised crops. The Huron-Wendat of the Great Lakes region, like the Iroquois, were both farmers and hunters. The Cree and Dean of the Northwest were hunter-gatherers, and the Sioux were nomadic, following the bison herds. The Inuit lived off Arctic wildlife, and West Coast natives preserved fish by drying and smoking it. Warfare was common among Aboriginal groups as they competed for land, resources, and prestige. The arrival of European traders, missionaries, soldiers, and colonists changed the native way of life forever. Large numbers of Aboriginals died from European diseases to which they lacked immunity. Despite this, Aboriginals and Europeans formed strong economic, religious, and military bonds in the first 200 years of coexistence, laying the foundations of Canada. The first Europeans, the Vikings from Iceland, who colonized Greenland 1,000 years ago, also reached Labrador and Newfoundland. The remains of their settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows are now a World Heritage Site. European exploration began in earnest in 1497 with John Cabot's expedition, the first to map Canada's east coast, exploring a river, naming Canada. Between 1534 and 1542, Jacques Cartier made 3 voyages across the Atlantic, claiming the land for King Francis I of France. Cartier heard the Iroquoian word Kanata, meaning village, from 2 captured guides. By the 1550s, the name Canada began appearing on maps. Cartier's exploration paved the way for future French claims to the territory and marked the beginning of a significant chapter in Canada's history. Royal New France. In 1604, French explorers Pierre de Monts and Samuel de Champlain established the first European settlement north of Florida. Initially, they settled on St. Croix Island in present-day Maine before moving to Port Royal in Acadia, now Nova Scotia. In 1608, Champlain built a fortress in Quebec City, facing harsh climatic conditions and forging alliances with the Algonquin, Montagnais, and Huron against their common enemies, the Iroquois. Despite numerous conflicts, including a century-long battle with the Iroquois, the French and Aboriginal peoples collaborated in a thriving fur trade economy. Leaders like Jean Talon, Bishop Laval, and Count Frontenac expanded the French Empire in North America, reaching from Hudson Bay to the Gulf of Mexico. Struggle for a continent. In 1670, King Charles II of England granted the Hudson's Bay Company exclusive trading rights over the watershed, draining into Hudson Bay. For the next 100 years, it competed with Montreal-based traders. The skilled and courageous men who traveled by canoe, known as voyageurs and coureurs des bois, formed strong alliances with First Nations. English colonies along the Atlantic seaboard eventually became richer and more populous than New France. In the 1700s, France and Great Britain battled for control of North America. The British victory at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759 marked the end of France's empire in America, with both commanders, Brigadier James Wolfe and the Marquis de Montcalm, killed in battle. The province of Quebec. Following the war, Great Britain renamed the colony the province of Quebec. The French-speaking Catholic people, known as habitants or Canadians, strove to preserve their way of life under British rule. To better govern the French Roman Catholic majority, the British Parliament passed the Quebec Act of 1774, allowing religious freedom for Catholics and the restoration of French civil law while maintaining British criminal law. United Empire Loyalists. In 1776, the 13 British colonies south of Quebec declared independence, forming the United States. Over 40,000 Loyalists fled the American Revolution to settle in Nova Scotia and Quebec. Joseph Brant led thousands of Loyalist Mohawk Indians into Canada. The Loyalists came from various backgrounds, including Dutch, German, British, Scandinavian, and Aboriginal, and from Presbyterian, Anglican, Baptist, Methodist, Jewish, Quaker, and Catholic religions. About 3,000 Black Loyalists also came seeking a better life. Some Black Nova Scotians, given poor land, later moved to establish Freetown, Sierra Leone, a new British colony for freed slaves. The beginnings of democracy. Democratic institutions developed gradually and peacefully. The first representative assembly was elected in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in 1758, followed by Prince Edward Island in 1773, and New Brunswick in 1785. The Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the province of Quebec into Upper Canada, Ontario, and Lower Canada, Quebec, granting legislative assemblies elected by the people. The name Canada became official at this time and has been used ever since. The Atlantic colonies and the 2 Canadas were collectively known as British North America. Abolition of slavery. Slavery existed worldwide, including in the British Empire. The first movement to abolish the transatlantic slave trade emerged in the British Parliament in the late 1700s. Upper Canada, led by Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe, became the first province to move toward abolition in 1793. The British Parliament abolished slavery throughout the Empire in 1833. Thousands of slaves escaped from the United States, following the North Star and settling in Canada via the Underground Railroad, a Christian anti-slavery network. A growing economy. Canada's economy grew during the French and British regimes, with the Hudson's Bay Company dominating the fur trade. Financial institutions and the Montreal Stock Exchange opened in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The economy was based on farming and exporting natural resources like fur, fish, and timber. These were transported by roads, lakes, rivers, and canals, laying the groundwork for Canada's future economic development. The War of 1812, the fight for Canada. In 1812, the United States invaded Canada, believing it would be easy to conquer. Canadian volunteers and First Nations led by Chief Tecumseh supported British soldiers. Major General Sir Isaac Brock captured Detroit, but was killed at Queenston Heights. Lieutenant Colonel Charles de Salaberry turned back 4,000 American invaders at Chateauguay. By 1814, the American attempt to conquer Canada had failed. The War of 1812 ensured Canada's independence from the United States, solidifying the present-day Canada-US border. The British paid for a costly Canadian defense system, including the citadels at Halifax and Quebec City, the Naval Dry Dock at Halifax, and Fort Henry at Kingston, which are now popular historic sites. Rebellions of 1837-38. In the 1830s, reformers in Upper and Lower Canada believed progress toward full democracy was too slow. Armed rebellions occurred but were defeated by British troops and Canadian volunteers. Lord Durham recommended merging Upper and Lower Canada and introducing responsible government. Some reformers, like Sir George Etienne Cartier, later became fathers of Confederation. Responsible government. In 1840, Upper and Lower Canada were united as the province of Canada. Reformers worked toward responsible government, which was first attained in Nova Scotia in 1847-48. Lord Elgin introduced responsible government in United Canada in 1848-49. La Fontaine became the first leader of a responsible government in the Canadas, championing democracy and French language rights. Confederation. From 1864 to 1867, representatives worked to establish a new country, creating two levels of government, federal and provincial. The British North America Act passed in 1867, and the Dominion of Canada was born on July 1, 1867, now celebrated as Canada Day. The old province of Canada was split into Ontario and Quebec, which, along with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, formed the new country. Each province would elect its own legislature and have control over areas such as education and health. Dominion from sea to sea. Sir Leonard Tilley suggested the term Dominion of Canada, inspired by Psalm 72. This vision of a powerful, united, and free country spanned a continent. The title was written into the Constitution and remains part of our heritage today. Expansion of the Dominion. The Dominion expanded over time, with provinces joining as follows: 1867, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. 1870, Manitoba, Northwest Territories. 1871, British Columbia. 1873, Prince Edward Island. 1880, transfer of the Arctic Islands to Northwest Territories. 1898, Yukon Territory. 1905, Alberta, Saskatchewan. 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador. 1999, Nunavut. Canada's first Prime Minister. In 1867, Sir John A. Macdonald, a father of Confederation, became Canada's first Prime Minister. Born in Scotland, he came to Upper Canada as a child, becoming a lawyer in Kingston, Ontario, and a gifted politician. His portrait is on the $10 bill. Sir George Etienne Cartier, a key architect of Confederation from Quebec, helped negotiate the entry of the Northwest Territories, Manitoba, and British Columbia into Canada. Challenge in the West. When Canada took over the Northwest region from the Hudson's Bay Company in 1869, the Métis of the Red River were not consulted. Louis Riel led an armed uprising resulting in the creation of Manitoba. Riel later led a second rebellion in 1885 and was executed for high treason, a decision strongly opposed in Quebec. Riel is seen by many as a hero, a defender of Métis rights, and the father of Manitoba. The Northwest Mounted Police, NWMP, was established in 1873 to pacify the West and assist in negotiations with the Indians. The NWMP founded Fort Calgary, Fort Macleod, and other centers that today are cities and towns. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, are now the national police force and one of Canada's best-known symbols. A railway from sea to sea. British Columbia joined Canada in 1871 after Ottawa promised to build a railway to the west coast. The Canadian Pacific Railway was completed in 1885, fulfilling a national dream. The project involved European and Chinese labor, with the government apologizing in 2006 for the discriminatory head tax on Chinese immigrants. Moving westward, Canada's economy grew in the 1890s and early 1900s, attracting immigrants. Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the first French-Canadian Prime Minister, encouraged immigration to the west. The railway enabled the settlement of 170,000 Ukrainians, 115,000 Poles, and tens of thousands from Germany, France, Norway, and Sweden, developing a thriving agricultural sector. The First World War. More than 600,000 Canadians served in the First World War, with the Canadian Corps capturing Vimy Ridge in 1917, a defining moment for Canada. The war ended on November 11, 1918, with 60,000 Canadians killed and 170,000 wounded. The war strengthened national and imperial pride, particularly in English Canada. Women get the vote. The women's suffrage movement, led by Dr. Emily Stowe, achieved voting rights for women. In 1916, Manitoba was the first province to grant women the vote. By 1918, most Canadian women aged 21 and over had the right to vote in federal elections. In 1921, Agnes MacPhail became the first woman MP. Quebec granted women the vote in 1940, thanks to the efforts of Thérèse Casgrain and others. Between the wars, the British Empire evolved into the British Commonwealth of Nations. The Roaring Twenties were prosperous, but the Great Depression of the 1930s brought hardship. The Bank of Canada was created in 1934 to manage the money supply and bring stability to the financial system. Immigration dropped, and many refugees were turned away, including Jews fleeing Nazi Germany in 1939. The D-Day invasion, June 6, 1944. Canadian troops played a significant role in the D-Day invasion, capturing Juno Beach. The Canadian Army liberated the Netherlands in 1944-45 and helped end the war in Europe. The D-Day invasion and the subsequent liberation of Europe marked significant contributions by Canadian forces during the Second World War. The Second World War. Canada joined the fight against Nazi Germany in 1939. Over 1 million Canadians served, with 44,000 killed. Canadians fought bravely in various theaters of war, including the unsuccessful defense of Hong Kong and the raid on Dieppe. The Royal Canadian Air Force took part in the Battle of Britain and contributed significantly to the Allied air effort. The Royal Canadian Navy protected convoys in the Battle of the Atlantic, helping to resupply Britain. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 brought the Pacific Theater into focus, with Canadians also playing roles in the Pacific conflict. The war ended with the Allied victory in 1945, but not without significant sacrifices and contributions by Canadians. Summary. In this section, we explored the rich and diverse history of Canada, from the early Aboriginal peoples and the first European explorers to the establishment of a nation through Confederation. We examined key events like the War of 1812, the rebellions of 1837-38, and the development of responsible government. We also highlighted Canada's contributions to both world wars, the expansion of its territory, and the growth of its multicultural society. Understanding these historical milestones is essential for appreciating what it means to be Canadian today, as we continue to build a prosperous, inclusive, and free society. In our next video, we will discuss modern Canada. Feel free to check out our previous videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified when the next video is uploaded. Thank you for watching.